Over the past few years, many political analysts, historians, and ordinary people observing global events have begun noticing that the world feels increasingly unstable compared to the decades before the COVID-19 pandemic. Not necessarily because global history has suddenly become more violent than earlier periods, but because multiple geopolitical, economic, and technological pressures are occurring simultaneously, creating an environment of persistent tensions rather than isolated conflicts. Historically, global stability has always followed cycles. Periods of relative peace are often followed by periods of strategic competition between rising and declining powers. The current global environment appears to be moving from the unipolar world order that existed after the Cold War towards a more fragmented multipolar system where multiple regional powers compete for economic, military, and political influence. In this video series, we will gradually examine global instability from multiple perspectives. Future episodes will cover financial systems, housing crisis, migration pressure, global trade realignments, climate politics, and economic inequalities. So if you are interested in deep form analysis videos, consider subscribing this channel and liking the video, and stay tuned for future episodes by clicking the bell icon. We also want to emphasize that this video is not trying to simplify global politics into moral narratives. Instead, the goal is to analyze structural forces dividing global instability. We would also generally encourage viewers to share their perspective in the comments because different viewpoints often help improve collective understanding of global issues. Let's start with the Russia-Ukraine war. The war between Russia and Ukraine represents one of the most important geopolitical turning points of the 21st century because it challenged many assumptions that global security planners had made after the Cold War ended. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine is not simply a territorial conflict. It's fundamentally a conflict about geopolitical influence, historical identity, and strategic security architecture in Eastern Europe. From Russia's perspective, NATO expansion represents a gradual shift of Western military influence closer to Russian borders. From the perspective of Western government and institutions such as NATO supporting Ukraine represents protection of sovereign states' independence and prevention of aggressive territorial expansion. The economic consequences of the war were equally important. European countries have long depended on Russian natural gas exports, and when sanctions were imposed on Russia, energy prices across Europe increased significantly. This reveals how deeply global geopolitics and global economic systems are intertwined. Modern wars are rarely purely military conflicts. There are also economic warfare systems where sanctions, trade restrictions, and financial isolation functions as strategic weapons. Ukraine itself became a proxy battlefield of broader global competition. Western military aid and Russian military operations turned the war into something larger than a regional conflict, because global supply chains, food markets, and energy markets all began experiencing ripple effects. One particularly overlooked aspect of this war is how it affected developing countries. Ukraine and Russia are both major agricultural exporters, and disruptions in grain and fertilizer exports contributed to rising food prices in parts of Africa and the Middle East, which in turn increased political pressure on governments already facing economic instability. Now let's move over to Middle East, where we have a series of layered conflicts, power competitions, and hybrid warfare. The Middle East remains one of the most complex geopolitical regions because conflicts there are rarely isolated. Instead, they tend to involve networks of alliances, ideological competitions, and proxy warfare. The conflict between Israel and Palestinian political factions operating within Palestine continues to persist because the conflict is not only territorial, but also deeply rooted in national identity, historical displacement, security fears, and competing political narratives about sovereignty. For Israeli policymakers, security threats from militant groups have shaped defense doctrines for decades. For Palestinian communities, political fragmentation and territorial restrictions have created long-term governance challenges and social instability. The conflict continues not because of a single unresolved negotiation failure, but because multiple social, political, and security incentives make long-term compromise difficult to achieve. Meanwhile, the rivalry between Iran and Israel represents something different. This is not traditional warfare, but rather what modern military analysts call strategic shadow conflict. Iran's regional strategy involves supporting allied militia groups across Lebanon, Syria, and other parts of the Middle East to expand its strategic influence without directly engaging in full conventional warfare. Israel's response has been based on intelligence operations, targeted airstrikes, and cyber warfare operations aimed at preventing Iranian military technological advancement. In 2025, tensions escalated when coordinated operations involving the United States and Israel reportedly targeted Iranian-linked military infrastructure. These actions were framed as deterrent strategies rather than attempts to initiate broader war escalation. The logic behind deterrence warfare is based on creating enough military risk that adversaries avoid crossing certain strategic thresholds. In 2026, the conflict is once again brewing up in the Middle East as Iran has been once again targeted by combined US and Israeli strikes. Iran has responded by launching drones and missiles targeting not just Israel, but the entire Arabian Peninsula, aiming for different US and Israeli targets in the region. For the time being, these exchanges demonstrate controlled escalation warfare, where both sides attempt to send political signals without triggering a full regional war that could destabilize global energy markets. Because the Middle East remains one of the world's primary energy production centers, any large-scale war there would likely have immediate global economic consequences. So let's move over to South Asia and talk about the nuclear deterrence politics. South Asia represents one of the most strategically dangerous geopolitical regions because it contains two nuclear-armed rival states with long history of territorial and ideological conflicts. The rivalry between India and Pakistan has existed since the partition of British colonial India in 1947. The Kashmir region has remained a persistent source of tension because both countries claim historical and political legitimacy of the territory. In 2025, broader tensions increased again following military skirmishes and intelligence accusations between both sides. However, nuclear deterrence plays a stabilizing but dangerous role. Nuclear deterrence does not eliminate conflict, instead it changes conflict behavior by discouraging full-scale invasions while encouraging small-scale proxy operations and political signaling. The Pakistan-Afghanistan conflict became particularly intense in February 2026 when Pakistan conducted air operations targeting militant infrastructure inside Afghan territory. Pakistan argued these operations were necessary to counter cross-border militant attacks, while Afghanistan viewed them as sovereignty violations. The conflict is complicated by geography, tribal networks, and non-state militant organizations, which make traditional diplomatic resolutions extremely difficult because security threats do not follow national borders in the same way political borders are drawn. Talking about Africa, the conflict inside Sudan represents one of the most underreported humanitarian disasters in modern geopolitics. Competing military factions are fighting for political authority and economic resource control. The humanitarian consequences have been severe, including civilian displacement, food shortages, and infrastructure collapse. African conflicts often have global consequences because they contribute to migration flows, regional trade disruptions, and political instability in neighboring countries. Now, why global instability feels more intense right now? Global instability may not necessarily be higher than earlier historical periods such as World War II or the Cold War. However, modern instability feels more intense because global communication networks allow people to witness global crisis in real time. Psychologically, humans are not well adapted to processing continuous global crisis information. In previous historical periods, information about war and economic collapse traveled much slower. Today, social media creates constant exposure to global instability. The world appears to be transitioning into a multipolar geopolitical structure where multiple competing power centers shape global order. This transition period is historically dangerous because power transitions often produce strategic competition before new equilibrium systems emerge. The future of global geopolitics will likely depend on economic stability, diplomatic cooperation, and technological competition rather than purely military dominance. If you enjoy this deep geopolitical analysis, consider subscribing and supporting the channel. This is part 1 of a larger series exploring global instability. Stay tuned for future episodes analyzing financial systems, trade conflicts, migration pressure, climate geopolitics, and political transformation. Write your thoughts in the comments down below about what you think is driving global instability today. And do you also think that the post-COVID pandemic world is more unstable and crisis is unfolding every moment? Thank you very much for watching.